Have you ever found yourself wondering how to really dial in your arrow setup for bow hunting? Especially, when you face that tough shot, maybe hitting heavy bone. We're talking about maximizing performance, making sure those hits count. So today we're doing a deep dive into Dr. Ed Ashby's 2008 study update, part 6. And our mission really is to unpack how front to center FOC, how it impacts arrow penetration, especially with heavy bone. And maybe surprisingly, what it means for your arrow's total mass. This is for you, whether you're, a seasoned bow hunter tweaking your gear or just starting out and want to get straight to what works.
Yeah, and this isn't just talk, right? The source here is a really detailed research paper. It's packed with graphs, hard data. Dr. Ashby's work, it's all focused on actual real-world terminal performance. What happens when the arrow hits. It's about understanding the why and how you can apply it.
Okay, so let's unpack this foundational idea first. FOC. What exactly is FOC in an arrow?
Well, it's basically how front-heavy your arrow is, like where it balances. FOC just describes how much weight is up near the broadhead end.
And Dr. Ashby focused on it.
Right.
Because, well, his earlier tests showed something specific.
Exactly. His testing using arrows identical, except for FOC, showed a clear, measurable gain in penetration once FOC hit 19%. And it just kept going up from there. That's why it became such a focus.
Okay, so measurable gain above 19%.
Right. And you might wonder why they didn't test soft tissue penetration as much with these different setups.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. The EFOC, that's extreme front of center, and the ultra EFOC arrows, they penetrated soft tissue so well. I mean, exceedingly high levels. You needed a target like many feet thick just to start measuring the differences.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, it was kind of off the charts. The focus naturally had to shift to the real challenge, which is bone.
That makes sense. I mean, that's a remarkable claim about soft tissue.
Yeah.
So how did Dr. Ashby make sure he was really isolating FOC's effect, especially with bone? What were the conditions?
Good question. The testing was incredibly rigorous. That's key. They used arrows with identical or very nearly identical external profiles. Same broadhead, the 190 grain grizzly.
Okay.
Shots were on similar sized animals, always 20 yards, broadside thorax, impacts only. And crucially, they only counted shots where the arrow held up completely, maintains structural integrity.
No failures counted.
Right. And every arrow set was bare shaft tuned, perfect flight.
So flight wasn't a variable.
Exactly. It takes arrow flight quality out of the equation. So the results really are focused squarely on FOC's influence.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting then, right? The actual data. Let's talk about hitting something tough, like a buffalo rib. Graph 28 using a 54-pound longbow. What did that show?
Okay, yeah, Graph 28, this one was remarkable. They increased FOC by about 13.4%. That's going from 10.3% up to 25.7%. And the result? A 39.3% increase in average penetration on that heavy entrance side buffalo rib.
Almost 40% more penetration just from shifting the balance point forward.
Yes. That's a huge game, right where you need it most, hitting hard bone.
What does that mean for, the average hunter out there?
Well, the implications are pretty big, I think. Hitting heavy bone, it's always a possibility, isn't it? And often, that's the difference between a clean kill and maybe a wounded animal.
Definitely.
This data shows FOC directly impacts your ability to push through that bone. That's critical for ethical hunting.
Okay, now let's look at the 40-pound recurve data. Graphs 29 and 30. You mentioned a twist here.
Yeah, this is where it gets even more dramatic. So here they had a bigger FOC increase, about 20.1% from 11.8% up to 31.9%.
Yeah.
Graph 29 shows the overall average penetration increase was 70.2%, which is already huge.
70%, okay.
But then, Graph 30, this is the real eye-opener. They looked only at the shots that actually breached the bone with those same arrows.
Uh-oh.
The penetration increase for those shots jumped to a massive 96%.
96%, just for the ones that broke through the bone.
Exactly. What's fascinating is that distinction. See, in Graph 29, for those lower FOC arrows, only half of them actually managed to breach the rib.
Oh.
So when you isolate the successful bone-breaching shots, that 96% increase becomes incredibly compelling. It shows the huge advantage high FOC gives you after you overcome that initial hard resistance.
Wow. Okay, so the benefit really kicks in once you break through.
Seems that way, yes.
And did this pattern hold up with heavier bows, like the 64 and 82 pounders in graphs 31, 32, 33?
Absolutely. The consistency is really striking. the pattern holds. More FOC meant more penetration every time. For
Right.
instance, graph 31, a 9.5% FOC increase gave a 23% penetration boost.
Okay.
Graph 33, they increased FOC by almost 20%, and penetration went up by nearly 50%, 49% to be exact.
So it wasn't just a fluke with the lower weight bows.
Not at all. It's repeatable across different setups, different bow forces. The consistent pattern is just undeniable. In every single test series, the arrow with the greater FOC, keeping dimensions the same, it penetrated more. That's a 100% correlation rate in these tests.
100%. That's pretty definitive.
It really is. Which brings up the important question, right? How can you use this? How can we apply this information to our own arrow choices?
Exactly. So if we try to quantify that, graph 34 breaks it down, right?
Yeah.
The gain per percent of FOC increase. But there seems to be a difference in the ratios. Some were higher, like 2.9 to almost 4.8%. Others were lower, 2.4 to 2.5%. Why?
Right. That's a key observation. And the explanation is actually pretty simple, but really important for understanding real-world results. It's the limiting effect of hitting the offside heavy bone barrier.
Hitting bone on the way out.
Exactly. For those higher force arrows in graphs 31 to 33, a full 90% of them went all the way through the thorax and then hit another half-inch thick heavy bone, the offside rib.
Okay.
So that stopped them, or significantly slowed them down, limiting the measured penetration. We don't know how much further they might have gone otherwise. It capped the results.
So the actual potential gain might be even higher than those lower numbers suggest.
Very likely, yes. And what's also fascinating and really critical is that the amount of FOC didn't seem to affect the heavy bone threshold itself.
Meaning whether or not it breaks the first bone.
Precisely. Breaching that initial bone, that depends on the arrow's impulsive force. Basically, it's momentum mass times velocity at impact.
So FOC doesn't help you punch through the initial bone, but it helps after you punch through.
That's what the data strongly suggests. But here's another interesting detail related to that. There was one arrow setup, the 790 grain internally footed EFOC arrow, but this one used a modified grizzly broadhead.
Modified how?
It had an ultra-high mechanical advantage design, basically designed to slice and pry through tough stuff more efficiently. That specific arrow was the only one in the study to get a 100% breach rate on the offside rib and 100% exit wounds.
Wow. Even compared to heavier arrows.
Yes. It really shows the dramatic difference broadhead design, specifically mechanical advantage, can make, even on an already enhanced EFOC arrow.
That's a huge point about broadhead choice then. It's not just about the arrow.
Absolutely, it's a system.
So because fewer arrows hit that offside barrier in the earlier tests, graphs 28 to 30 give us a clearer picture of that post-breaching penetration gain potential.
Exactly. They show more of what the arrow can do once it gets through the initial hard stuff, less influenced by that second barrier.
Okay, so digging deeper then. Graph 34 suggests that once FOC gets above 19%, the minimum gain for hitting hard bone is over 2.4% increase per 1% FOC increase.
Right, and the reasoning behind that is quite important. Remember, the earlier tests showed no real penetration advantage until FOC hit 19%. So if you look at graph 31 again, where FOC went from about 11.8% to 21.3%.
Right, below and slightly above the 19% mark.
Yes. And it showed a 25% total penetration gain. The implication is that almost all of that 25% gain happened in that small window between 19% and 21.3% FOC.
So the gain per percent is much higher in that specific range.
Phenomenally higher, yes. If you calculate it, it suggests something like a 10.9% penetration increase for each 1% FOC increase once you're actually above 19%. It strongly suggests that once you get into that EFOC range, the gain per percent of FOC increase as well, far greater than the overall average might imply.
And graph 35 looks specifically at that, right?
Yeah.
Gain per 1% FOC above 19%?
Yes, exactly. It tries to isolate that effect, minimizing the bone barrier influence. For the data from graph 28, it showed an average gain of 5.9% per 1% FOC above 19%.
Okay.
And for graph 30's data, where the FOC was even higher, it showed an average of 7.4% increase per 1% FOC above 19%.
So the rate of gain itself seems to be increasing as FOC goes up.
That's the critical implication here. This data strongly suggests that the higher your arrow's FOC is to start with, the greater the penetration gain you'll get for each additional 1% you increase it. So yeah, it's reasonably certain we're dealing with the progressively increasing rate of gain. It's not linear. The benefits seem to compound.
Okay, that's a major point. Now let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about arrow mass. You mentioned Asian buffalo testing had some real surprises. What happened there?
Ah, yes, the mass question. This is where things got really counterintuitive for many people. Dr. Ashby found that a 790 grain EFC arrow, again, tipped with that high mechanical advantage, modified Grizzly, it consistently bested all the super heavy arrows.
Super heavy meaning.
Arrows over 900 grains, the kind traditionally thought necessary for huge, tough animals like Asian or Cape buffalo.
So a sub 800 grain arrow outperformed the 900 plus grain ones.
Consistently, yes. It provided reliable, thorax-traversing hits. It always breached the offside rib and gave exit wounds.
That's hard to believe almost.
It is astonishing. I mean, Dr. Ashby himself says few bow hunters, including him, would have ever thought a 655 grain arrow, let alone a 790 grain one, could do that reliably on massive buffalo bulls.
Right.
Yet the data is there, and it did this with relatively low impact force too. Only about 0.474 slug feet per second impulse, or roughly 39 foot-pounds of kinetic energy.
Which is much lower than many hunters use.
Much lower. It really challenges that conventional wisdom that you just need massive kinetic energy numbers. Efficiency seems key.
And there were some theoretical calculations about how much mass you could potentially reduce.
Yes, based on these findings. The calculations suggested comparing an FOC arrow to a similar normal or high FOC arrow.
Yeah.
You might get the same penetration with about a 20% reduction in mass for the EFOC arrow.
Okay.
Comparing an ultra EFOC to an FOC, maybe a 15 to 25% mass reduction.
And the most extreme comparison.
Ultra EFOC versus a normal or high FOC arrow of the same profile. The calculation suggested a potential 35% to 45% reduction in arrow mass could yield the same level of penetration.
45% less weight for the same penetration on heavy bone.
That's what the theoretical extrapolation suggests, yes. For a shot hitting heavy bone, it's mind-blowing.
But you said theoretical.
Absolutely. A crucial caution here, these are calculations based on limited Ultra EFOC data so far. They reflect what the data indicates now, but more testing is needed. However, even with that caution, the differences in outcomes they are seeing are, without question, of massive magnitude. So it's certain there will be a very significant difference in the arrow mass required between Ultra EFOC and lower FOC arrows to get the same penetration. The lower FOC arrow will need to be much heavier.
So does this mean arrow weight just isn't that important anymore, as long as you're above some threshold?
No, that's not the case at all. That's a common misinterpretation.
Okay, clarify that.
In every single comparable test set, Ashby has done normal, high, EFOC. If you increase arrow weight while keeping the dimensions and the degree of FOC the same, penetration always increased.
So more mass still equals more penetration, all else being equal?
Yes. Basic physics dictates that relationship will hold true for Ultra EFOC arrows too. More mass, more momentum, more penetration potential. The difference we're seeing between lower and higher FOC arrows, that huge penetration difference, it represents the net gain you get by reducing wasted arrow energy, like flexing and oscillation upon impact. It's about efficiency.
Ah, okay. It makes the arrow more efficient, so less mass can do the same job, but more mass with that same efficiency would do an even better job.
Precisely.
Well,
You put it perfectly. It's about optimizing the force you have.
got it. So bringing this all together for the bow hunter listening, what are the practical, actionable takeaways? Dr. Ashby mentioned 3 requirements.
Yes. 3 prime requirements to really capitalize on these potential benefits of higher FOC. First, total arrow integrity. Your arrow has to hold together, no component failure.
Makes sense.
Second, perfect arrow flight. A high FOC arrow that flies corally won't penetrate well. Bare shaft tuning is key.
Right.
And third, a truly sharp broadhead. That's just fundamental for cutting tissue and breaking bone effectively.
Integrity, flight, sharpness.
Okay, and then the core findings to apply. Increasing FOC lets a lower mass arrow match or beat the performance of a heavier, lower FOC arrow, assuming the same profile.
Okay, the efficiency point again.
But, and this is the important but, if you take 2 arrows of the same mass and profile, the one you give a higher FOC to will penetrate more, measurably more, in inches.
So FOC adds penetration potential regardless of the mass comparison.
Correct. And then there's the heavy bone threshold. Let's reiterate that. The ability to breach heavy bone consistently jumps up when arrow mass gets above 650 grains.
That 650 number seems important.
It does, and crucially, the degree of FOC has no effect on that threshold. For breaking that initial bone, mass trumps FOC. You need enough momentum.
But after breaching.
But after breaching, or if you don't hit heavy bone, then the higher the FOC, the greater the average penetration you'll get.
So Dr. Ashby himself, what does he use? What's his philosophy based on all this?
Well, he shares that for his serious hunting, he uses a 790 grain EFOC arrow with that modified grizzly broadhead. He fully believes more ultra EFOC testing will lead to even better performance down the line.
But he still uses a fairly heavy arrow.
Yes, and he explicitly states he won't go below 650 grains total mass himself, specifically because of that heavy bone threshold. He wants that assurance for breaking bone.
It's about preparing for the worst case then.
Exactly. His approach is, and I quote loosely here, preparing for the best terminal arrow performance I can achieve on the worst hit I can imagine.
That makes a lot of sense for hunting.
It does. He acknowledges, for us mere mortals, there are going to be some bad hits. We aren't perfect, and the arrow you choose is going to make a difference between success and failure in those tough situations. That's the core message for you, the listener, when selecting your arrow. Build in that performance margin.
So what we've really seen today is just how powerful FOC is as a variable. It affects penetration after hitting bone, and it has this really astonishing potential to let you adjust arrow mass while keeping performance high.
It really does. And maybe that leaves us with a final thought to chew on, something building on Dr. Ashby's work. What if thinking about and improving your arrow's FOC doesn't just improve penetration on bone hits? What if it fundamentally changes how you think about your ideal arrow setup for any hunting situation? Good hits, bad hits, the whole picture.
That definitely gives us a lot to consider for our own setups. We'll certainly be exploring more of these practical applications in future deep dives. Thanks for listening.